Hello, 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 and welcome to yet another Beacon webinar. Thank you for joining us this hour. I will start the session. My name is Kirilo, and I'm a Business Analysis Office Director at SoftServe. And let me quickly share a few slides for you so we can kick this session off. Yeah, as I said, welcome to yet another Beacon webinar. Today we are having a very interesting session. At least I expect it to be very interesting. And just a few words about the company we represent here. It's called SoftServe. For those of you who are not aware of the company, like we're a pretty large tech company specializing in consultancy services and software development. And we offer a wide range of services, including expertise in AI, big data, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and many, many, many more. You name it, we got it. Also, what is very important for our group here, I believe that we have pretty well established business analysis office, which is operating since 2012. And currently we have around 400 business analysts spread across 12 countries, and I think even more so all around the globe. And apart from all of that, we also do have a lot of, well, not a lot, but some quite interesting educational projects or courses, as you might call it. And through this QR code, you can access the webpage where you can have the overview of those courses and maybe register to some of them. Now, I'll let this slide hang here for a while, and I want to check if our chat is working and have a little bit of communication between us. So, guys, please put in the chat, like, where are you joining us from, like which location in the world, and maybe also, like, what are you looking for in this session today? Like, what are you expecting? What did you come here for? Looking for what? Let me see what we have. Okay, we have Germany. Wow, great. We have also people joining from Lviv, multiple instances, by the way. Lviv, Lviv, Lviv. Okay, hello, Lviv. Hope you have great weather there. We have Sofia. We have USA. Perfect. Mexico. Great. We have Krakow, Poland. Okay, okay. So it seems that chat is working. Bulgaria. Okay, hey, Ivan. So yeah, what are you expecting from the session? Put those comments also in the chat, and it will be pretty beneficial for me and for our speaker today, who I will introduce in a moment, to know that. Okay, we have Katerina from Kiev. Okay, hello Kiev, that's great. All right, so it seems that chat is working. That's pretty good. I'm not sure if we have this Q&A box today. If we do have, we may use it for the questions. If we don't, you may use the chat for the questions. I don't see it, but usually we have one. So
yes, we have.
we have it. Okay, maybe it's just
Yes.
I don't have enough rights to see that. Maybe, or maybe because I'm sharing the screen. So Q&A section is there. You can use it for the questions, put them there, pile them up there. Our speaker will be checking the Q&A section and answering the questions as we go, or maybe we will like make some pause and answer those questions. And also you can use the chat if Q&A section is boring for you. Use it for questions, for comments, and also for communication. That's also fine. All right, so let's bring up the slide with our speaker. Let me introduce Desislava Salakova. She's a business analyst from SoftServe, located in Bulgaria. Maybe she will talk more about herself, but what I will tell you definitely that she is a great professional, and we've known each other for several years already. Has 12 plus years in business analysis, is a certified professional, has CCBA and CBDA certification, which is data related, which will be a topic of our conversation today, and is an active mentor and trainer, which we are very, very grateful for. And also, please stick around till the end of our session. There will be very interesting announcement towards the end of the session. Yeah, I guess that's it. That's my part. So Desi, you ready to take over?
Thank you, Kirilo. Okay, let's first finish the bureaucratical part, right? Share screen.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi all. Very nice to have you here today. Hope it's going to be interesting. We did not get anything in the chat around the goal of you being here today. But either way, I'm hoping that it's going to be fun and interesting. Um, I won't be sharing more about myself. Let's not go over this one again. It's not really necessary. But we can jump straight into the topic. And I'll tell you that when I was invited to do this webinar today, I've been actually requested to do something which is going to be interesting for the audience. And interesting usually is related to sharing personal stories as well. So even though might not be seeing a lot of slides today, I'm hoping that I'll be able to share a couple of my stories. And hopefully this is going to be interesting. But what are we going to talk about today will be data. And mainly, we're going to focus on trying to understand what's the best approach to actually find the appropriate data sources, because this is usually a thing. And we do not want to waste our time into bothering with sources that are not useful, or we do not want to waste our time in bothering with sources that are not okay, because then this is going to cost us money. This is how it usually ends. So let's just quickly kick it off. And that first slide is just for you, just as a reminder. Maybe some of you have joined the same Beacon webinar, but like 2 years back. And I had a slide like this then. It was very interesting for me too to see how things have evolved over the past 2 years. And you can see some statistics here. I'm not going to stop on how many millions of terabytes are being produced each day. But the interesting thing actually is on the third bullet. And as you can see, how data is growing over the years, it is actually growing in a very fast way, in a way that the prediction for 2025 is actually to increase 150% compared to 2023. What this means for us is that we are going to have to deal with a lot more data around us. And for us as business analysts, this specifically points into the direction of how do we support our companies, how do we support our customers into that ocean of data, because a lot of companies are actually turning into data so that they can become data driven, they can properly organize their business, they can actually relate to the data, make the appropriate decisions based on what they're seeing, not just based on their gut feeling, but based on what they're seeing into their data. And this can be related to anything, right? I mean, from starting from how do our customers feel, why they're not buying our products, or simply to why they're not visiting our website. Anything that you can think of is nowadays related to data and can actually lead to some decision making within a company. So you can see that number, it's actually huge. I saw lately in a training an explanation of what a zettabyte is. It's worth the explanation. It has a lot of zeros behind. And you can just not imagine how large this is. It keeps on growing. There is one note that I want to make here. The largest growth is coming out of the creation of videos and this type of audio recordings as well. So you can imagine how quickly this is going to continue because we are all utilizing these tools, right, for recordings. We have a lot of information, a lot of videos are coming out in YouTube. You can check trainings, everything that you can think of. So this is how fast things are moving forward. In that ocean of data, really, it becomes very important to think of how do we actually choose the appropriate data so that when we are trying to make decisions, we take the right decisions. And we cannot make right decisions unless we have the appropriate data supporting us. So First, we have to start with who's actually responsible for doing the data sourcing. And you would probably say, well, business analysts are nowhere here, right? I mean, we don't do that. We don't build pipelines. We don't know how to drag data from here to there. We don't know how to deal with the technicalities. And you'll be right. This is how also IIBA defines that, right? Data sourcing itself is performed by individuals who possess strong technical skills. And that's true. I mean, we are not there to support the actual movement of data or to actually build any storages, right, where data is going to sit. But why are we needed then, right? Being analysts. Well, because we are the people who understand what sits behind the data. It's not only important to have a lot of data, but it's also important to understand what is that data that we have. Because when we are focusing on a specific problem or we want to um, achieve something by hanging on some opportunity, we need to properly understand our data. We need to understand what's the business behind that data so that we can make proper usage of it. And here I will stop for just a moment, and I will give you an example that I have from my like recent activities. Um, I actually have a customer who's very aware of what they're doing. They started a very large initiative trying to fight with one of their issues, which is a process that they want to optimize. And the funny portion is that they were well aware when they were starting that for this initiative, they will require a lot of data because they right away stated that they need to have a machine learning model with a specific purpose, is generating something specific. But in order to have that machine learning model, you need to have data behind it. And they did realize we don't have that data. So what do we do now? Um, they were suggested, right? They need to start gathering the data so that the initiative can move forward. And when I joined them, we were in a very, very funny state, I would say, because we had a data science team. The data science team works as expected, right? I mean, they're there, they're capable of analyzing data, they're capable of working with the model. But what I figured is that we actually don't know enough details around the data that is being gathered and it's been gathered manually. There is notion of what the business behind that is, but we don't know enough. And now we are going back into trying to understand the details and what exact business processes sit behind that data, because otherwise we are just not moving forward. We just keep getting stuck in the same place and it doesn't move properly. This is also needed for our data science team, right? I mean, they do need someone to actually help them out with explaining some of those business processes that sit behind the data, because otherwise they cannot interpret it properly. And that's absolutely fine. This is where we are there for, we as business analysts, because we are the people who are supposed to properly understand the business behind the data. So, what else is important? As I just told you, right, in that example, that's fine. We started an initiative. We realized we don't have data. So now, how do we plan? How are we going to deal with that? I mean, we do have to plan how this data collection is going to happen. Again, we as analysts are very good people who can actually support the data professionals into answering certain questions in the understandings of what are the requirements behind the data? Why do we need that data? What are we going to achieve with that data? And you can see here a couple of questions, right? And on the top of it, you can see why data is needed. This is where we usually start from, right? We either are going to have some problem or we want to achieve something, right? We are fighting for some goal. We have some opportunity, so we want to fight for it too. So we need to have proper requirements of why is that data needed? Why are we there? Why are we talking about that data at all? The rest of the questions are related to how are we going to kick it off, right? So how can we deal with our initiative? Do we already have that data? Maybe we don't. So now we have to decide how we are going to gather it. Do we need to have historical data, or we can only live with what we have in the present? And I can tell you that if we need historical data, that might be a huge thing because historical sources are not always in good shape. Let's put it that way. We'll talk about quality in a bit. When and how are we going to collect that data? I just told you my example, right? And I can tell you that data collection in that initiative where I am is happening manually. You know, which is the best tool for data gathering? I think it's still Excel. So these people sit and they gather their data in Excel, but this takes time. So do we have the actual time to gather the data in that way? Maybe we need to build some tool which is going to help us out into that data gathering. And the last one, right? Probably not the last one, but how is that data going to be validated afterwards? And we are going to talk about this one in a little as well. So these are questions that we as analysts can ask, and we can support that journey into how do we gather the data. And they're all relevant. They should be there at the beginning of our initiative. This is why we're calling it planning of that data collection. If we are late with properly planning how we are going to collect the data or what kind of data we need, then probably we might end up with just losing time, which is usually also losing money, or you can even end up with an initiative that's going to be just a failure, right? If you don't manage to do whatever you're fighting for, you might have users that refuse to utilize it, and then it's not going to be useful at all. So, what kind of a data choice do we have? Well, we actually have a lot, as you already saw, right? I mean, zettabytes of data available out there. But from the perspective of our organization, how this is going to work out. We can define data based on whether it's a primary or a secondary source. What does that mean? Primary sources are usually there within the organization. Some of them are already going to be existing. So you will already have data that you can utilize right away, or maybe with some massaging. Secondary sources can come outside of your organization. What that means? Nowadays, there are already sources where you can go and you can buy specific information. And I will give an example here. I had a project where we were working for a company dealing with marketing. So they were doing outside advertisement, outside being, you know, everything that you see on the street is advertising. This is their business. So when they are planning which are going to be the customers whom they're going to address their services to, they actually utilize their internal data because as any other company, they do have a CRM system themselves, but they're also buying information from outside, and there are marketing companies where you can go and you can buy this information with available data around customers, right, whom you can contact and you can ask whether they would like to have such type of advertisement. So now the question for them was, how do we now gather that data together? Because that seemed to be a not very easy exercise because of how clean their data was. But this is how you can think of primary versus secondary sources. What will be the best out of multiple sources? Imagine that you have the same data within a couple of different sources. They probably have a difference between them, right? There is some reason why they were split. But still, you need to decide which one of all of them is going to be appropriate for you for the purposes that you need that data. Internal versus external sources, we spoke a little, right? Internal going to be within your organization. External will be if you go somewhere outside and you're going to have to buy, or you can even utilize something which is free, right? I mean, it's still possible. There are still free sources as well. Available versus to be collected. That's also an important choice. Available, as we already mentioned, means that's already there for you. It might not be perfect, so you might still need to do some massaging, or there's still some manipulations that need to be done over that data, but it's already there, so you can utilize it. If it's something that you are identifying that needs to be collected, then you need to also plan properly how you're going to collect it. So you won't end up as on my initiative, right? I mean, taking a couple months just to figure out how do you get your data there. Level of effort and cost, quite important. As we just spoke, same as whether it's going to be collected or not, right? Imagine now you need to collect that data. You are going to have to plan how you're going to collect that data. If you need to build a tool to actually collect your data, then this is going to cost you some money and time. As an example, we can look into if you have some e-commerce, for example, right? And they do not have analytics. Why would they not have analytics? I cannot think at that stage. But if they don't have analytics, they need to build in analytics so they can understand customer behavior. Okay, this is going to require some effort and some money to get it done, and the level of data processing. So even though we spoke that we can have sources that are already there available for you, that's fine. But if we figure that these sources are not perfect and we are going to have to process them a lot, then this is going to be an issue. And because we are on that funny story, right, with my initiative, I can tell you that I am doing such type of an exercise over the past weeks, and it's really time consuming and very heavy. And it actually shouldn't be the job of the business analyst to do that. But in this case, it's required. So this is something that needs to be evaluated, whether it makes sense to process it or we need to look for some other sources out there. We did speak about the data requirements, but we should not forget the non-functional requirements. They're very important if you can think of like security, if you can think of privacy. You can imagine any of this actually affects heavily on what kind of data sources you can use. An example I'd give right away. I used to work for a customer and they were dealing with marketing campaigns. So they had a lot of data related to their customers, and it was very important how they build their campaigns based on the data that they have. And fortunately or unfortunately for them, data was actually for people, right? So when we're dealing with people, we deal right away with the privacy. We had a lot of GDPR related stuff, so everything had to be hidden. So we had to be very careful in how we are processing our data sets, how we are working with that data. So we are still hiding, right, the information about the people because this is what we're supposed to do, but we are providing enough detail to the people who are working with the marketing campaigns so that they can build those campaigns properly. Okay. Before we move forward, I'll stop just to check the chat. Okay, no questions so far. So let's go. Okay, and we are talking about data. Let's see what types of data we also need to make a choice between. So what's structured versus unstructured? And again, we spoke at the beginning, right, of how data is growing, right, generally. And I told you that the main growth of the data worldwide is coming out of the creation of audio, video recordings, and so on. So where is this fitting within what we're going to talk on this slide? So what's structured data? Structured data is easy. It's very easy to use because it's organized. It's already thought of. It means that it has been split in the way that it can be utilized. It has been formatted in a pretty way, hopefully with good quality. It's living somewhere in a database management system, which means that you can easily deal with it by just using some kind of a simple query language. It's not always so simple, right? I mean, to utilize every structured data that you have, but ideally, this one is well structured, so you don't have to worry anymore of thinking additionally about that. Let's say you can just jump in, you can organize the data sets, you can link them, and you can start dealing with them. What's unstructured in that case? Well, unstructured data is everything that exists outside of a repository. And when you're thinking of those things that I told you that are mainly bringing the majority of the growth of data worldwide, this is where unstructured data comes in. It's about documents, it's about emails, it's about images, audio, video. So all of this. Why is it so important to understand what's structured versus unstructured? Well, because again, while you are working with the data, while you're planning the data collection, when you are thinking of what kind of data you need and what kind of data you're going to utilize, you're also going to have to think of how are we going to use that data. If it's structured, that's okay. Probably we can think of how we are going to join the different data sets so that we can produce the outcome that we're looking for. But if we're looking into the unstructured data, so now we need to be a little bit more smart. What are we going to utilize from that unstructured data? How are we going to maybe join it to some structured data that we have? So how are we going to deal with this one? It might actually take a little bit more effort for us to work with. So how do we decide what actual data sets are we going to take? We spoke about sources. So this is the general thing, right? I mean, they can be external, internal. They can be available or not available, but within those sources, we might have multiple data sets. So we still need to decide what are going to be the appropriate data sets that we are going to pick up. So first and most important, this is what you have the analyst for. Analysts are supposed to know the business behind data. So this is where they can jump in and they can just do some digging around, not with the purposes of actually building some sophisticated model, right, or doing anything like this, but just to research a bit. What's there? What's available? What can we expect out of the data that we're seeing? Maybe we have questions. Maybe not everything is clear. Maybe there is more complexity behind that data, and we need to really understand what that is. We're also going to have to focus on determining some specifics, right? We need to understand what are the specific data types we're going to deal with, data dimensions, sample size, what that means, whether we're going to use the whole population of that data set or we're just going to pick what we need. So we will cherry pick out of it. What are going to be the relationships between the different data elements? What are going to be the relationships that we are going to have between the data sets? Is it going to be okay? Can we say that we can properly join these data sets and everything is going to work out? And again, back to my initiative, obviously it's painful, right? So this is why I'm sharing that example constantly. I told you, right, that we've had our customer who said, yeah, fine, we need to gather data, and they've started gathering the data. And fortunately or unfortunately, it's been a while before I actually jumped into that initiative, and I started looking into the data and I started asking questions because it was unclear. So now we went back to how are you guys gathering the data? Where does it come from? What do you have behind it? And I figured that they actually have multiple sources from where they gather the data. And we ended up with, okay, so now is it okay that we have everything in one place? No, we have to split it because having it in one place is not accurate business wise. It's not showing properly the different business processes behind that data. And we started splitting. Okay, that's not trivial either. Now, because data has been gathered from all kinds of different places, we actually figured that, okay, it looks like some of these relationships are not working okay. So now we have to go back and we are going to have to run through that whole data set and actually think of how do we deal with this one? How are we going to split it? How are we going to then match it up back together so that we can achieve whatever we're trying to achieve? Is it a problem? Generally, no. I mean, it's not unusual that we are identifying more new things along the way. The problem would be how much time are we going to lose while we are doing this exercise and how much money we are going to lose. And the other thing would be because we are expecting to have people utilizing the result of our work, if we delay providing that product to our users, are we going to lose our users? In which case, whatever we did is going to be in vain. So this is the type of questions that we need to ask ourselves. Don't forget about the last one. When you start digging into the data sets, you can also easily identify gaps. And gaps needs to be taken care of because they won't be helpful when you're working with your data. Okay, before we proceed, I think we do have some questions somewhere in the Q&A. Okay, how data will be validated? Okay, yeah, interesting stories around data validation. Actually, again, from the initiative that I'm currently working on, this is a very tricky portion. Data validation is something that has to be done on the go. It shouldn't be something left behind. Because again, the more you're digging into it, the more things you are identifying. The problem with how you're going to validate it might also end up with how big the data sets you're working with are, right? So there is complexity behind. Um, I can tell that what I'm seeing from the initiative where I'm involved into is it's very interesting. It's not just around how we are manually doing a validation, but we are also involving some machine learning initiatives into this one. And it's actually quite interesting. So we figured that we can build up a mechanism where we can have a constant validation of the data, which is going to be looped with a human presence. What that means, the system can tell you in a way, this is something that you need to check, recheck, go back, check it. And then we do a loop. We have people doing the check as well. And we are hoping that we'll be able to build up some kind of a process behind it. So we don't lose sight of the data because we do have the expectation that we are going to have multiple sources of gathering that data. So even though today this is a manual thing, we're actually building something which will be automated for them. When you work with data requirements, which are the usual formats you are using, I assume user stories are not okay here. Yeah, you're absolutely right. User stories are not really helpful if you do not have something that can be supported with the user story behind, right? So there are things and things, let's put it that way. So if you do have something which you can relate to a user story. So example, again, that ML model that we are building, it actually has business behind it. So what we are I'm not sure what's happening. Marta is switching them very fast. Sorry, Marta. If you are working with something that can have a story behind, then that's fine. So, for example, the machine learning model that we're building actually answers some question, right? So we are providing something with that machine learning model. And it's something like a feature, right? Because it's the expectation of the users to be able to see something. I will say it's a number. I cannot reveal what exactly that is, but it's a number. So if we are to put something of this logic into a requirement, then we can build it up as a user story, right? We can still say, yeah, it's fine. As a user, I want to be able to do this because of that. Because they do have an expectation that they will see some number behind. So, okay, these type of requirements we can put. If we are talking purely about the data itself, then user story is not going to be helping you out. How I'm dealing with this one, there are other techniques that you can utilize. Of course, you won't have the data, the user story format in that case. You will need to be utilizing some techniques that are going to be helpful in that case. That those can be like data dictionaries, depends on what you need, right? Data mappings, any kind of this type of documentation. But then at the end of the day, how would a ticket look like? Well, it's more going to look like as a job to be done, to be honest. And I usually also put like the purpose of, right? Why do we need that for? Why are we going to work it out? So user stories, not so well fitting into this one. But because we do work in an agile environment, so the expectation will be that you will have some tickets and tasks. So you need to find the appropriate format in your case. As mentioned, if it doesn't work to actually put whole mappings into the ticket, then probably you need to build up some documentation. You can reference to that documentation. Back in the days, I used to have a customer, and we were building a service which was providing a lot of data for external to our team, but like internal for the company users. Let's put it that way. So we were building that service. We were actually providing product related information, and we had within the company, there were different brands and they had websites. So we were providing that data for them, brand specific, of course, so that they would have the appropriate information on their websites. How I was dealing with this one, the beginning when I joined the team, it was hard. They were not using any kind of requirements management tools, so they didn't even have user stories. That was kind of fine. So we were working with some kind of tasks. With the time, I figured that it's hardly impossible to keep up the speed of how the product was evolving just by having those tickets. So I actually had to build up the good old documentation. And it was huge, I can assure you, because I needed to keep up huge tables with information of how we have mapped the data and how we are also building up the logic to be brand specific, because it was important per brand to have the appropriate formats. Um, Another question. Do you use any AI-driven tools for data mining or sourcing? From my perspective, no, I would say unfortunately. I didn't have the chance to have such type of experience. I'm hoping that one day I'll be able to see that. Um, I have seen though very heavy backend with how data can actually be sourced, which is nowhere near what we already have today. But back to the example with the marketing campaigns of the customer where we had to deal with the GDPR, we actually had pipelines, a lot of pipelines that we used to gather the data, and then we used to do everything inside so that we can get that data properly sent right to the marketing team. And it was a challenging project because it was purely backend. And, like business analysts don't always feel very comfortable when they do not see screens. Okay, another question. Have you ever talked client out of recreating Excel through software development project? Oh, okay. Excel is my favorite topic. Um, the same customer with the service that I just spoke about was actually a very interesting case. So when I joined, I was not expecting that it's going to be heavily data involved. I'll be honest. It was sold as we are building some service. That's kind of fine. It turned out to actually be very complex because of those brand specific items. And when I was working with the customer and with the different brands, the interesting portion was that I've identified curiosities, let's put it that way. So on one side, they did had like an internal database with a lot of sourcing information that we could utilize, which was on enterprise level. So we had this enterprise level information. And on the other side, we had those different brands. And the interesting portion was that these separate brands, and especially the one that piloted with us, so they were very active. They ended up telling us, guys, we actually dropped off the enterprise solution because the people who were supporting the enterprise solution were taking such a long time to work out whatever we're requesting them to do that we've decided that we're going to have our own sources. So what we figured was, okay, so where do you store your data? They had their own separate database. That was one of them. The next brand we went to, we figured that they actually have Excels. And this is where we had to work out through an exhaustive process of explaining people why Excel is not the best source of information. We had to pass through that process of telling them that you shouldn't be dealing in that way because you actually have a huge database with a lot of information inside. And then they came back with, yes, but what we have there is not accurate. What we have in the Excel is the accurate thing. So we had this back and forth with a lot of negotiations of why we shouldn't be using the Excel and why you guys should move back to the database where it's appropriate to actually store your data until they figured that, yeah, maybe it's a good idea to actually have a single source of truth, because otherwise, what was happening was they were getting so many claims from their websites that it was just not okay for them. Customers were complaining because data is inaccurate. I mean, what they were showing for the products, right? Descriptions were inaccurate, pictures were inaccurate, so literally everything was inaccurate. It was a very lengthy process. I think we took something like 3 years, and we had to constantly like show that what we are doing actually brings value so that they can end up dropping some of those Excel sources that they were using before. I've never faced a case when we actually had to create a table or like a whole database out from scratch, right? I mean, just to put the Excels there. This is what I'm currently working with because the data that is being gathered for my current initiative is being gathered in Excel. So we actually also build the database behind that, storing it, but we don't need to have this type of negotiation. They already know that they need to have this. Okay, jumping into another one. Have you had projects where you didn't have access to production data and still needed to perform data analysis on masked, not up-to-date data synthetic? If so, what was your way of approaching it? Okay, this is a challenge, I have to admit. So far, I never had the issue with not being able to convince customers that it's important for the analyst to have access to the production data. I did have, I had to have justification of why, right? It was not as easy as that. Um, because usually they don't provide that to the development team. So you have to kind of explain of why exactly that person needs to have the data. The problem with working with masked or synthetic data would be that you are not going to get the appropriate insights from that data because it's not the real data. Um, Back to that customer, when we were dealing with the marketing information, as I told you, we actually also had to deal with GDPR. So it was actually complex to explain why even I need to have access to that data. Um, it's never impossible to actually get that access. The problem is how do you justify it and whether the justification is going to actually pay off afterwards. I wouldn't recommend working with masked data, I'll be honest, because like we can invent how the masked data can work, but it's not going to really help you out into building the insights. Now, if you do have some data which is not the production one, but it may be just outdated, right? So maybe some dev environment or something, it might still worth the thing of working with it. But don't forget that if it's outdated, then you're probably not going to be getting the most up-to-date insights. I will be facing this one once again, like hopefully in a couple months, if we are successful with what we're doing, because we are now going to be facing a restriction which is related to data which cannot be accessed by people that are outside a specific country. So this is very interesting. I have no idea how we're going to deal with this one, but I think in that case, probably I will drop into your situation and I will have to imagine some of that stuff because it's not going to be available for us to do the analysis. Analysis on the level where you can get some summarizations of data is still possible. I remember that I was asking people from inside the organization, especially with that marketing related initiative, people from inside the organization to actually provide me data, which was summarized, right? So, like, it's like you going and giving requirements around what kind of an analysis you want to do over the data so you can get some information back. This one is not very easy to do, and it's actually time consuming because you might need to do a couple times back and forth because you won't get the thing from the first time. right? It's usually easier if you can go in and check it yourself. But if you're checking it based on some summary, then it's going to have to be like, maybe you can do that again too, or can you add this information too, because it's not for me enough for me to understand. Okay, another one. How good of an Excel user you should be if you want to go to the business data analysis? Uh, Depends. It depends on what you're going to do with the Excel. I can tell you that a couple years back, I've learned a couple of those formulas, right, in the Excel. Like everyone says, you need to be pro in Excel. It doesn't need to go that far. Then for some time, I didn't work in the Excel at all, so I forgot them. And then I ended up having an initiative where, um, I'll be honest with you, I was processing Excels. And I will tell you why. Because the organization was actually doing a migration from one system to the other. But what they have identified is that in the first place, they actually had data issues. And those issues couldn't be solved just by doing some manipulations. So we actually had to have a human working with the Excel, putting additional data inside or fixing data inside so that we can load it into another system. And I spent 6 months doing this one. I've learned a lot of what was needed from Excel, but you don't really need to be a super pro in the Excel so you can work it out. And don't forget that Excel has help, right? So if you need that, you can always find the answer of the question that you're looking for. For huge data analysis exercises, and this is probably not for analysts, right? So if you need to really do data mining, it's not going to be for you to do this exercise. And Excel is definitely not the right place because you are going to wait for hours until it processes something, if at all possible. So Excel can be helpful for smaller sets or for the moments where you're just trying to investigate some stuff and you can pull some specific from a data source. You can look through it and you can figure. Okay. Another question from the chat. Why BA should be bothered by diving into structured versus unstructured? The same for the relationship shouldn't be on the BA side. Um, I guess I will say again, depends. It's a yes or a no thing. So first of all, it depends on whether you are going to have a data analyst. If you do, that's awesome. You are free from doing any of those investigations. But if you do not have a data analyst, so you still want to handle somehow the case, right? When we're talking about diving into structured versus unstructured, or we're talking about relationships, how data looks, or how we are going to join it, you don't need to be a pro there. I'll be honest. I'm a self-taught when it comes to data. Um, and what we are more referring to would be the actual understanding of why this data needs to be related in that manner. So imagine, let's see, what can we imagine as an example? Imagine that you have in one place you have customer related information, which is like purely related to the customer, right? You have some names, some addresses, some kind of personal information which is required for ordering, for example. And on the other hand, you have information which is related to the actual orders. You need to be capable of saying how you're going to join this data together, even if you are not saying that with the exact technical names, right? So you don't need to be capable of telling them, now you guys need to take this specific ID and match it to that specific ID in the other table. But you need to be capable of understanding how the relationship is going to work out. If I am a person and I live in one of the tables because this is my customer information, is it like, will I only have one order? Will I have many orders? How are my orders going to look like? Will I have just one item per order? How many items up to I can have in the order? Why do you need that information for? Because this is going to be important on what you're going to do with that data afterwards. If I tell you that I want to have a report or I want to build some kind of a graph which is going to be showing, I don't know, how many items customers are buying from that website, for example, how you are going to give the requirements if you do not understand, for example, how many orders a customer can have or how many items they can put in the cart. So this is going to be your knowledge of this is what sits behind this data set. This is what sits behind that data set. How they can talk to each other. Can they talk to each other? Because maybe they're like totally different, right? And they cannot talk to each other. So you don't need to be like a super pro. You don't need to be capable of giving the exact details of how this should be done, but like having the understanding of what's going on behind and being capable of explaining it to those people who are going to build up that relationship is the important in that case. Okay, we got a bit distracted, but we were talking about data sets. And we were particularly talking about how we are going to choose the data sets. And there is this very nice, helpful technique that can help out also with understanding which data sets we want to use. It's called the 5 Vs because they all start with a V. It's as simple as that. So what do we have there? I guess we've already spoken about a lot of these things, but we're just going to quickly pass through them. So volume, what does that mean? It means what's the amount of data that we have, which is being produced, what will be the size of the data sets to be processed. So you need to understand how large your data sets are. Are they good enough, actually? Are they large enough? Maybe they're not large enough. So you need to consider this one when you're looking into the options for data sets. Velocity, what that means. It's around how fast data is being generated and how frequently the data can be collected and processed. So is it good enough so that you can work with that one? If you can imagine the example of fraud detection, for example, fraud detection is highly based on transactions, and transactions are volatile, right? I mean, they do happen all the time. In that case, for the fraud detection, you would need to have data which will be generated um, often enough, right, so that you can deal with the fraud detection. Variety, what that means. So do you have enough of choice, let's put it that way, around the data sources, around the different formats, the types that are going to be processed? Do you have so many of them that it's going to be actually hard to utilize all of them? So maybe in that case, you need to consider which one is best to use so you don't get overwhelmed with data, because this is also not a good option. Veracity refers to whether data is trustworthy. Can we actually trust that data? Do we see any inconsistencies in that data, any uncertainties, anything that is worrying us, due to which we might not want to work with that data? And value, it's around whether the data set is actually really going to bring some real valuable answers to us so that we can achieve our goals. And I do have another example here. Back in the days when we were just dealing with reports, there wasn't machine learning at that time. Um, I used to work for a bank, and we had one peer from the business who was very keen on doing properly analysis over the companies, right? So they did have that like assessment of small and medium business companies. And she was super enthusiastic. She came to us and she was like, I need to have this report. And she opened to us something which was horrifying. I think it has like 80 columns and a lot of calculatable stuff behind it. And we were looking into it and we were thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to build it? And then when we started looking into what specifics she has put inside, I started asking her questions, but why do you need this one? This one is actually contradicting to the other one. How are you going to utilize it? I mean, at the end of the day, it's so big. You are going to put so much data inside. Is it going to be really useful? Will it really answer the questions that you're looking for? I think that report never got built, to be honest. So this is the end of that story. And we need to go back to data quality. So even though you might have a lot of sources, even though you might have a lot of data behind you, well, if it's not of good data quality, that's probably going to be an issue. And what do we exactly have behind data quality? So first of all, do we have consistency between the different values? In that case, I can tell you this is something I'm currently fighting with. So unfortunately, it seems to be the very simplest thing that you shouldn't be fighting with, like as whether length is a numeric value, but it seems like that's still a problem, even though everyone should be understanding it. Completeness. Do we have all the required data? Is everything present there? Out of your observations, if it's a specific record and you know that you need to have, I don't know, 10 out of 20 should be filled in, is that valid for that data set? Or you do have missing elements there, which is not going to be okay for any analysis that you're doing or for any further initiatives that you're going to have over it. Consistency. What that means, whether the data values are coded using the same approach. So are they consistent into how they look like from one place to the other or even within the same data set? Because again, this is causing issues. From my example, right, with my recent activities, I can tell you every small thing actually affects machine learning and what kind of information it's going to produce. And if we're not keeping our data clean, then we are risking of actually providing low value predictions, which is totally not okay. Integrity. It refers to whether we will have the values with proper relationships. In that case, if you do not have them, actually, right, it's just data is going to also fall into not being consistent enough so that you can work with it. Timeliness. When do you need to have that data there? Will that data be there in time? Will it be outdated? Will it be in the appropriate format, right? How are you going to work with it if it's not coming frequently enough, right? Currency actually is around the frequency that I just talked about. So it's around how often your data is going to get updated. Let's put it that way. What will be the likelihood of the data not being correct? As we just spoke, like transactions, for example, right? They're very volatile. So if we're taking the balances of accounts, for example, how long can we utilize those balances of accounts because before they actually become outdated and we need to have another set of information because it's not going to fit the purpose of what we're doing. Reasonableness, that's a very long word. So this is around whether what we are seeing in the data as patterns is actually meeting our expectations. So when we are looking into that data, is it what we are really expecting or is it not what we are expecting? If it's not, maybe it's not worth to work with this one. We're going to have to look for another data set. Uniqueness and the duplication, it comes to exactly what you're thinking of. So whether we do have that uniqueness of entities within the data set and whether we are going to have to work with that data set to actually uh, work for that data quality, right? So do some deduplication efforts or do some cleanliness efforts so that we can make it clean for utilization. And accuracy actually refers to whether the data represents real life entities. In that case, you can think of if our users are logging in every morning, is that the case for everything that we see in that data? Or do we have some weirdish stuff which is showing that some user is logging in not in the morning, but they are, I don't know, going in 10 p.m. or something like this. So some kind of a um, persistence here in what's happening. So we are back to why analysts are needed there, right? And the techniques that you're seeing here are actually common, not only utilized by data analysts, but also utilized by business analysts or how you want to call them, business analysis professionals. And these are just a couple, right? I mean, you can find many more in the books, definitely not exhausting list, but how you can utilize them. So brainstorming is the easiest way to actually look for a list of sources. What that means, well, you can gather a group of people within the organization. You can just talk to each other until you figure out what can be the list of eligible sources. Of course, then you might need to dig in deeper. The document analysis, a good one. If there is documentation out there, probably you'll be able to work it through understanding some data architecture that you have, right? Some information around that data. There are also available tools already, right, where data governance is structured. So you will have additional information about the data set. So you can go dig in there, look for the data that is going to be appropriate for you. Data sampling related to breaking large sources into small pieces so you can do proper analysis. But this, as I mentioned, these are just three out of many that you can utilize so that you can think of what are going to be the appropriate data sources, the appropriate data sets that you're going to work with. And back to why us? Well, we do possess those skills of actually understanding properly the business behind, as I already said. And this is where skills such as organization and solution knowledge come in place because of our understanding of the business. This is where we do come and help with our problem solving and decision making skills because we can help out with identifying the appropriate data sources for the appropriate goal or for the appropriate problem to be solved. We can actually influence decisions. We can help out with influencing decisions around what's going to be chosen. Okay. Um, I'm not seeing any questions at this stage. Please feel free to drop more. Um, this was our topic for today. At the end of our presentation, I'd like to bring your attention to the new CBDA certification bootcamp that we're building. Marta Kirillo actually already mentioned, right, that we do have a bunch of trainings out there. So you can guys make profit of them if you're interested. Specifically, this one is going to be brand new. We are starting on the 16th of June. It's focused on the CBDA certification specifically. If you're interested in this one, it's IIBA endorsed. It's going to be available out there for you if you would like to get certified or if you're simply interested into data. I want to make a note here. We are not teaching people how to do data mining, not so sophisticated as technical people, but we are going to be focusing on the business behind data. So we're going to be looking into interesting techniques and also the whole process of how we work with data-driven projects. So hopefully this is going to be a good place where you can grow up. I do also want to share my story here just for your information of why I decided to get CBDA certified, because you've heard that I have a lot of years of experience in business analysis. I think data was just going behind me all of these years for some unfortunate reason. And at some point of time, I thought of, I do not have enough knowledge. I need to go and search for that knowledge because the more I go into different projects, the more I see that data is surrounding me. Even when someone comes and says, this project is related to building this type of a tool, and then we end up with actually talking about data. So I spent some time into searching for the appropriate certification, let's put it that way. And I've chosen IIBA's one because I like the way that IIBA is focusing on business, because at the end of the day, we are business analysts. And this is what we have chosen to do. So even when we are talking about data and we are digging into more specifics, into more interesting tools and into the future, let's put it that way, it's still all around data and we are still the same people. We do still possess the same skills. So this is how we can grow additionally. The uh, the guide to the business data analytics is very interesting. I can assure you there is statistics inside, just a bit. There is data related questions inside, of course, but quite interesting. And it's very insightful. From my perspective, it was very insightful. This is why I also decided to take the certification. So if you do want to check and see whether you are experienced enough with data, this is probably going to be a good place for you. If you want to grow professionally, of course, more people get certified in the CBDA because this is how they are also proving that they have this knowledge behind data. And of course, you are probably going to feel much more confident when you read the book and you have this wow effect of, oh, okay, I know that. It's not the first time that I'm seeing it here. So I'm welcoming you to join me in that bootcamp, which I'll be leading. You can already see it on the slide. So I'll be happy to have you there if you are interested in data and you would like to learn more, or simply you would like to get certification behind your data knowledge. Okay, sitting in that slide, I'm just checking the Q&A box. We do have another question. What skills or mindset shifts do you hope participants will walk away with after completing the bootcamp? Okay. Um, I'm not sure whether the bootcamp itself can actually shift your mindset. If you would want to shift your mindset, this is something that you're probably going to gain from the experience. I had the same experience when I was working through the BABOK to get the CCBA certification. While I was reading that book and then the other book, the thing was, do I really need to change anything around how I'm thinking? And the question was no. Why? Because before that, I actually spent some time into working, having experience with some projects like this, and it was helpful then for me to have this wow effect. Whether the bootcamp itself can change your mindset, I cannot really give you an answer with a yes. Whether you can gain more skills, you always gain new skills when you're visiting a training. Whether you will learn some new stuff depends on how much you already know. Whether you'll find some new techniques, well, that's for sure, I think, because even if it's not in that book, you'll find them elsewhere as well. And we have one more. What common gaps or misconceptions do you see among BAs preparing for CBDA certification, and how does your course address them? Gaps or misconceptions. Okay, let's think a little. Um, I think what we are largely tending to think when we are looking into data certifications is around what are the most common techniques that we are using as BAs when we are dealing with data. And it seems sometimes that we are focusing very much on the low level, let's call them that way, low level techniques. What I mean, we are over focusing on, do we understand how to build data dictionaries? Do we know how to deal with data mappings? So do we know all of these like day-to-day activities that we need to take so that we can deal with them? What we are not paying enough attention is the high level picture of why are we doing the business analysis? This type of, I don't know how you want to call it, misconception or a gap, I have seen not only for the CBDA, but also for the CCBA and for the CBAP. So it's us, we shouldn't be losing the focus on we are analysts. Why are we doing this? It's not just about the day-to-day techniques that we are going to be doing on a daily basis, building tables with data mappings. It's around the overall picture of why we are there. How we are going to address them in the course? Well, the course is mainly aligned with the Guide to the Business Data Analytics, but a small spoiler, we will be doing some exercising there. So hopefully we will have some fun as well into trying to work with invented scenario. Okay. How do you ensure the course stays practical and aligned with the real world challenges BAs face when working with data? So as I mentioned, as a spoiler, we will try to work with a case. So in that case, we are actually going to try to focus on a hopefully close to real life scenario. Plus, I am of those trainers who actually keep on sharing insights from my own stuff. So you guys are going to be getting information from what I'm dealing with on daily basis, right? Along the course. But we shouldn't forget that if you do need to prepare for the certification itself, theory is theory. So you're going to have to work with it. Um, we are also going to try to have questions so that we can also practice from that perspective as well. There is no guarantee that what you're going to be facing in the real world is going to perfectly fit into the book or vice versa, or maybe you're just not going to find the exact answer at this stage, but you can always find it later. It happens with any certification. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Hopefully I've managed to answer this and that.
Yeah, you did a great job. There were quite a lot of questions. Thank you so much, Desi. That
Thank
was
you too. Thank you all for
great.
joining us.
Guys, those of you who are in Zoom, we have a survey that we're asking you to fill in. It's just a few clicks to make sure that we will do these webinars better next time. We need to understand your feedback. So yeah, thank you so much, Desi. That was amazing session, and all of you guys, thank you for joining, and see you all probably for the next one. So that's it for today. Bye bye.